Chapter 1. The House at the End of Maple Street. The house looked smaller than Evan remembered. That was the first thing he thought when he pulled his car onto the gravel driveway. It wasn't actually small. His grandmother's house had 3 bedrooms, a wide porch, an attic that seemed to stretch forever, and a backyard that disappeared into a line of maple trees. But when Evan was 8 years old, the house had felt enormous. The hallway had seemed long enough to lead somewhere else. The staircase had been a mountain. The attic had been a kingdom. And the old kitchen table had been the place where his grandmother, Ruth, would sit with a cup of tea and draw pictures with him on rainy afternoons. Now, standing beside his rental car with a cardboard box in his arms, Evan could see every scratch in the porch railing. He could see where the paint had peeled near the front door. He could see the crooked flower pot that had been hanging beside the steps for almost 20 years. Everything looked familiar. Everything looked different. Evan carried the box inside. The house smelled like old wood, dust, and the faint lavender scent his grandmother had always used in her drawers. He put the box down in the hallway and stood there. For a moment, he didn't do anything. He simply listened. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. A pipe clicked somewhere behind the wall. Outside, a car passed slowly along Maple Street, and beneath all of it was silence. The kind of silence that only happens when someone who used to fill a house with small noises is no longer there. Evan looked toward the living room. His grandmother's armchair was still beside the window. A folded blanket rested over one arm. He had told himself he wouldn't get emotional. He had told himself this was simply a practical trip. The house needed to be cleared. The papers needed to be signed. The furniture needed to be sorted. The realtor would come next week. Then the house would belong to somebody else. Simple. At least, that was the plan. Evan walked into the living room. On the bookshelf beneath several old gardening books, he noticed something that made him smile. A children's book. Its purple cover was faded from years of sunlight. Harold and the Purple Crayon. Evan picked it up. He hadn't thought about that book in years. His grandmother had read it to him so many times that he could remember certain pages without opening them. When he was little, he'd been fascinated by the idea that a child could draw a path and simply follow it. A line could become a road. A circle could become the moon. A few quick strokes could become a house. Evan had once asked his grandmother whether Harold was real. She'd smiled and said, "That depends on whether you believe drawings have somewhere to go after you make them." He'd thought that was the wisest thing anyone had ever said. At 30, he thought it was simply something adults said when they didn't want to explain something. He put the book back. Then he went upstairs. The attic took him nearly an hour. Old Christmas decorations, boxes of photographs, his grandfather's fishing equipment, a broken lamp, 3 suitcases, a stack of Evan's elementary school drawings tied together with string. He sat, cross-legged on the dusty floor, and opened them. The first drawing showed a house. The second showed a dog. The third showed a family standing underneath a yellow sun. Then he found one that made him laugh. It was a terrible drawing of a café. The sign above it said, "Evan's Café." He remembered it immediately. His grandmother had asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up. "A café owner," he'd said. "Why?" "Because people come inside when they're cold." His grandmother had looked at the drawing for a long time. Then she'd said, "That's a very good reason." Evan shook his head. He couldn't believe he'd wanted to own a cafe. His life in New York had been almost the opposite. Deadlines, illustration contracts, apartment rent, subway trains, takeout containers, emails arriving at midnight. He had spent the last 7 years drawing things for other people. Children's books, advertisements, magazine illustrations, corporate mascots. He was good at it. At least, people told him he was. But somewhere along the way, drawing had stopped feeling like something he loved. It had become something he did. Evan put the old drawings aside. That's when he noticed the wooden box. It was underneath an old wool blanket at the very back of the attic. Small, rectangular, dark walnut. There was no lock. Evan brushed dust from the lid. His grandmother's handwriting was on top. Just 3 words. For Evan. He stopped breathing for a second. He sat down. Slowly, he opened it. Inside was a single pencil. Blue. Not bright blue, not the cheerful blue of a child's crayon. It was a deep, faded blue, like the colour of the sky just before evening. Beside it was a folded piece of paper. Evan opened it. His grandmother had written, "For the days when you don't know where to go, draw the next place." Evan stared at the sentence. Then he laughed quietly. "Okay, Grandma." He picked up the pencil. It felt strangely familiar. He turned it between his fingers. No brand, no eraser, just a small blue pencil, worn smooth from years of use. Evan found an old notebook in the attic. He opened to the first empty page. For some reason, he thought about being 8 years old again, about his grandmother sitting at the kitchen table, about rain against the windows, about that old purple book, and about how certain he'd once been that the world was much larger than adults understood. Evan placed the blue pencil against the paper. He didn't know what to draw, so he drew a line, then another. A sidewalk, a window, a small wooden door, a hanging sign. He paused. He had no idea why he was drawing a café. Again. He added 2 chairs outside, a flower pot, a street lamp. Then, almost without thinking, he wrote a name above the door. The Bluebird Café. Evan leaned back. It was nothing special, just a drawing, a silly little sketch made by a grown man sitting alone in his grandmother's dusty attic. He closed the notebook and forgot about it. At least until the following morning, because when Evan walked into the kitchen at 7:18 a.m., he found something waiting on the table. A small paper receipt. He picked it up. At the top was the name, the Bluebird Café. Evan stared at it. Below the name was an address. He knew the street. It was in Maplewood. He knew the town. He had lived there until he was 18. But he had never heard of the Bluebird Café. Evan turned the receipt over. There was one handwritten sentence on the back. He recognized the handwriting immediately. His grandmother's. "You always did draw better when you were looking for something." Evan sat down. For several seconds, he didn't move. Then he looked toward the attic ceiling. "Okay," he whispered. Outside, the first autumn leaves moved across Maple Street. And somewhere in the little town where Evan had grown up, a cafe he'd never seen before was waiting for him. Not because he had drawn it, but because, somehow, it seemed to have been waiting for him all along. And now, the rest of the story will be told by Alex. So get comfortable, close your eyes, and let the story continue.
Chapter 2. The Blue Pencil. Evan didn't drive to the Bluebird Café immediately. He spent nearly an hour convincing himself that he wouldn't. He made coffee. He opened the refrigerator and discovered that his grandmother had apparently believed butter could survive anything. He checked his phone. He answered 3 emails. He stood by the kitchen window and watched a woman walk her golden retriever down Maple Street. Then he looked at the receipt again. The Bluebird Café. The address was written underneath the name. Evan knew the street. That was the part bothering him. He knew Maplewood well enough to remember almost every business in town. There was the pharmacy near the town square, the old hardware store, the bakery that had been there since he was a kid, and a diner that served pancakes all day. But there had never been a Bluebird cafe. At least, not that he remembered. He grabbed his jacket. "I'm just checking," he told the empty kitchen. The house didn't answer. Evan drove downtown. Maplewood looked almost exactly as he remembered it. The same white church at the corner. The same brick library. The same enormous maple tree beside the post office. Even the barber shop still had the red and white striped pole he'd stared at through car windows when he was 6. He slowed when he reached the street listed on the receipt. There was no cafe. Evan parked. He looked left. Nothing. He looked right. Nothing. A bookstore occupied one side of the street. A small florist sat next to it. Across the road was a laundromat. And between the florist and the bookstore was an empty brick storefront. The windows were covered with brown paper. A faded for lease sign hung behind the glass. Evan frowned. He pulled out the receipt. Then he looked at the building again. The address matched. Exactly. He stepped out of the car. For a moment, he simply stood there. He felt ridiculous. Maybe the cafe had closed years ago. Maybe his grandmother had known about it. Maybe the receipt was old. That had to be it. He walked toward the storefront. The sidewalk was damp from last night's rain. A few yellow leaves had collected against the curb. Evan reached the front window. There was dust on the glass. He leaned closer. And stopped. Behind the brown paper, something was visible. A wooden chair. Then another. Evan moved closer. There was a counter. A pastry display. A small round table beside a window. And on the back wall, partially hidden behind the paper, were several framed photographs. His stomach tightened. He stepped backward. There was no way. He checked the address again. Same number. Same street. He looked at the storefront one more time. Then he noticed something on the glass. A small Bluebird sticker. It was almost completely faded. Evan touched it with one finger. He remembered his grandmother drawing bluebirds. She drew them everywhere. On birthday cards. On grocery lists. On the corners of envelopes. When Evan was little, he had once asked why she always drew the same bird. She'd said, "Because bluebirds know when it's time to go home." At 8 years old, that answer had made perfect sense. At 30, it made him uncomfortable. Evan stepped away from the window. His phone rang. It was his mother. "Hey, did you get there?" "Yeah." "How's the house?" "Smaller." His mother laughed softly. "I told you." Evan watched a cyclist pass through the intersection. "Mom." Did Grandma ever mention a cafe called the Bluebird?" There was a pause. It wasn't long. Maybe 2 seconds. But Evan noticed. "What cafe?" "The Bluebird Cafe." Another pause. Then his mother said, "Why are you asking?" Evan looked through the dusty window. "I found something." "What did you find?" "Nothing important." "Evan." He smiled. His mother had always been able to do that. Say his name in a particular way, and suddenly every lie felt embarrassing. "I found a pencil." "A pencil?" "Yeah." "What kind?" Evan looked at the blue pencil sticking out of his jacket pocket. "Blue." His mother was quiet again. This time, the silence lasted longer. "Where did you find it?" "In the attic." "Did you find the box?" Evan's smile disappeared. "What box?" His mother didn't answer. "Mom, I thought your grandmother threw that away." "What box?" "Evan, listen to me." His mother's voice had changed. Not frightened. Just serious. "Don't make a story out of it." Evan looked at the covered storefront. "What does that mean?" "It means your grandmother was sentimental." "That doesn't answer my question." "She kept things." "Mom, come home when you're done with the house." The call ended. Evan stared at his phone. He called back. No answer. He tried again. Still nothing. He put the phone away. Then he looked at the storefront. For some reason, he felt certain that his grandmother had known exactly where he would be standing. Exactly what he would see. And exactly what he would wonder. Evan crossed the street. The bookstore door opened as he approached. A woman stepped outside carrying a stack of books. She was probably in her late 60s, with short silver hair and round glasses. She looked at Evan. Then at the storefront. Then back at Evan. "You're Ruth's grandson." Evan blinked. "Do I know you?" "No." She smiled. "But you look like her." Evan didn't know what to say. The woman adjusted the books in her arms. "I'm Margaret. I own the bookstore." "Evan." "I know." That made him smile despite himself. Apparently everyone knows. Small town. Margaret glanced toward the storefront. "You found it." Evan's smile disappeared. "Found what?" "The café." Evan looked at her. "There isn't a café." Margaret smiled. "Not anymore." He looked back through the dusty window. "So it did exist." "Oh yes." "When?" Margaret shifted the books. "A long time ago." "How long?" She thought about it. "Long enough for people to forget." Evan waited. Margaret didn't continue. "So what happened to it?" "People moved." "That's it." That's usually how places disappear. Evan looked at the old cafe. "Who owned it?" Margaret smiled again. "You're asking the wrong question." "What should I ask?" She pointed at the blue pencil sticking out of his jacket. "Ask why your grandmother kept that." Evan instinctively covered the pencil with his hand. Margaret noticed. "Did she tell you about Harold?" Evan stared at her. "Harold and the purple crayon?" Margaret laughed. "Your grandmother read that book to you?" "Apparently everyone knows everything about me." "Ruth talked about you." Evan looked down. That sentence landed harder than he expected. "What did she say?" "That you used to draw." "I still draw." "Not the same way." Evan looked at her. Margaret seemed to realize she'd said too much. She turned toward the bookstore. "I have customers coming." "Margaret." She stopped. Evan pointed at the cafe. "Was my grandmother involved with that place?" Margaret didn't answer immediately. Then she said, "Everyone in Maplewood was involved with that place." And she went inside. Evan remained on the sidewalk. He looked through the dusty window again. This time he noticed something he'd missed. A table. Near the back. Table 7. The exact table he'd drawn in his notebook. He felt the blue pencil in his pocket. For the first time since finding it, Evan wondered whether he should throw it away. Instead, he drove home. That afternoon, he went back into the attic. He found the notebook. The drawing was still there. The Bluebird Cafe. The same table. The same window. The same little flower pot outside. Evan stared at it. Then he noticed something else. He hadn't drawn the people. But there were two people sitting at the table now. Very faint. Almost invisible. A man. And a woman. Evan leaned closer. His heart began to beat faster. He hadn't drawn them. He was certain. He turned the page. There was nothing behind it. He turned it back. The two figures were still there. Then something even stranger caught his attention. On the cafe wall in his drawing was a tiny framed photograph. Evan hadn't drawn that either. He picked up the blue pencil. He hesitated. Then he added one small detail. A door at the back of the cafe. Just a simple wooden door. He closed the notebook. Nothing happened. Evan laughed nervously. Of course nothing happened. He left the attic. That night, he slept badly. At 2:13 a.m., he woke to rain. At 2:21, he heard something downstairs. A soft sound. Like a pencil rolling across wood. Evan sat upright. The house was dark. He listened. Nothing. Then it came again. Tap. A pause. Tap. He got out of bed. He walked downstairs. The kitchen was empty. The living room was empty. The front door was locked. Then he saw it. The notebook was lying open on the kitchen table. Evan hadn't left it there. He was certain of that. He walked closer. The drawing had changed. The little wooden door he'd drawn at the back of the cafe was now open, and behind it was a narrow hallway. At the end of the hallway stood a woman. Evan couldn't see her face, but she was holding something. A blue pencil. Underneath the drawing, in handwriting that wasn't his, were 4 words. "Come back tomorrow, Evan." He didn't sleep again. And somewhere in Maplewood, beneath the sound of the rain, an old cafe waited quietly for morning. Chapter 3. The Cafe That Wasn't There. Evan waited until daylight before he went back to the storefront. He told himself that was because driving through town at 7 in the morning was easier than doing it at 2. It had nothing to do with the drawing. Nothing to do with the woman standing at the end of the hallway. And absolutely nothing to do with the words he'd found beneath the picture. "Come back tomorrow, Evan." He had considered taking the notebook with him. Then he'd decided against it. If he carried it around, he'd keep looking at it. And if he kept looking at it, he'd eventually start inventing explanations. That was what he did for a living. He illustrated children's books. He knew how easily the mind filled empty spaces. Give someone a few lines and they'll see a face. Give them a shadow and they'll see a person. Give them an old house, a strange pencil, and a grandmother who apparently knew more than she ever said, and they'll start creating a story where there isn't one. Evan understood all of that. He just couldn't explain why the drawing had changed. He parked across from the old storefront. The brown paper was still covering the windows. The for lease sign was still there. The building looked exactly as it had the day before. Ordinary. Empty. Dead. Evan crossed the street. He stood in front of the door. There was no cafe. No warm lights. No tables. No pastry case. No woman. Just a dusty old storefront. He laughed quietly. Good. A man walking past glanced at him. Evan pretended to be checking his phone. The man kept walking. Evan looked at the door again. There was something about the handle. It was old brass. And beneath the dust was a small bluebird engraved into the metal. He reached for it. The door opened. Evan froze. He hadn't expected that. He looked inside. The room beyond was dark. Not empty. Dark. There was a difference. The smell reached him first. Coffee. Fresh coffee. Evan pushed the door farther open. A narrow hallway led inside. He could see wooden flooring. A wall. The edge of a counter. And somewhere deeper inside, a soft yellow light. He stepped over the threshold. The door clicked shut behind him. Hello. Nothing. Evan waited. Then a voice came from somewhere near the back. You're late. He turned. A woman stood behind the counter. She was about his age, maybe a little younger. Dark brown hair pulled loosely behind her head. Warm brown eyes. A faded green cardigan over a white shirt. She had a ceramic mug in one hand. Evan stared at her. The woman stared back. Neither spoke. Finally she smiled. Not broadly. Just enough. Evan Miller. His stomach tightened. Do I know you? No. Then how do you know my name? She put the mug down. Your grandmother told me. Evan looked around. The cafe was real. Not exactly like the drawing. But close. Very close. The wooden tables. The mismatched chairs. The photographs. The pastry case. Even the old brass clock. His eyes moved toward the back. There was a hallway. And at the end of it was the wooden door he'd drawn. Evan slowly turned toward the woman. Who are you? Claire. Claire what? She smiled. Just Claire. That seems deliberately unhelpful. It probably is. Evan stared at her. Claire pointed toward a table. Coffee. I don't think I should be drinking coffee. It's 10 in the morning. I mean here. She looked around. It's a cafe. It's an empty storefront. Claire's smile disappeared. For the first time, she looked concerned. Not anymore. Evan glanced toward the windows. The brown paper was gone. Sunlight poured through the glass. Outside was Willow Street. But not the Willow Street he'd seen yesterday. The florist was gone. The bookstore was gone. The laundromat was gone. Instead, there were small shops with wooden signs. A bicycle leaned against a lamppost. An old blue pickup truck was parked beside the curb. And people were walking down the sidewalk wearing clothes that looked slightly out of place. Not costumes. Not old-fashioned. Just older. Evan walked toward the window. "What year is it?" Claire didn't answer. He turned around. "What year is it?" She looked at the brass clock. "That's a strange question." "Answer it." Claire studied him. 1998. Evan laughed. It came out too loudly. "Okay." He stepped backward. "Very funny." Claire didn't smile. Evan pulled out his phone. No signal. The screen showed the time. 10:04. The date was still there. August 10th, 2026. He held it toward her. "Look." Claire didn't move. "You're not supposed to have that." "What?" "The phone." Evan stared at her. "What exactly is happening?" Claire sighed. She walked around the counter. "Come sit down." "No." "Evan." "No. You know my name. You know my grandmother. You have a cafe that shouldn't exist. You say it's 1998. I have a phone that says 2026. And you're telling me I'm not supposed to have it." Claire looked at him. "You're making this more complicated than it is." "That's an incredible thing to say." She almost laughed. Almost. Then her expression softened. "Your grandmother said you'd be stubborn." Evan went quiet. "Did she say anything else?" "Yes." "What?" Claire walked toward table 7. She pulled out the chair. Then she looked at him. "She said you would come here when you were finally ready." Evan didn't sit. "Ready for what?" Claire glanced toward the old photograph on the wall. "I don't know." That answer surprised him. "You don't know?" "No." "Then why did you bring me here?" "I didn't." Evan looked around. "Then who did?" Claire didn't answer. Evan followed her gaze. Table 7. The exact table from his drawing. A small ceramic coffee cup sat on it. Beside the cup was a folded piece of paper. Evan approached slowly. He recognized the handwriting. His grandmother's. He opened it. "Evan, if you're reading this, you've probably spent the last few minutes trying to decide whether you're dreaming." He stopped. Claire looked away. Evan continued. "You're not." His fingers tightened around the paper. "But don't waste your time trying to understand how this works. You won't." Evan looked up. "That's helpful." Claire smiled faintly. He continued. "The cafe doesn't show people what they want. It shows them what they need to remember." Evan read the sentence twice. Then the next line. "And sometimes, remembering is the first step toward going home." The paper ended there. No explanation. No instructions. Nothing. Evan folded it. "That's it." Claire nodded. "That's it." He looked at her. "You knew this was here?" "Yes." "How?" "Your grandmother left it." "When?" Claire looked toward the window. 28 years ago." Evan felt the room shift beneath him. He sat down. For the first time since entering the cafe, he actually noticed how quiet it was. There were no customers. No music. No espresso machine. Just the ticking of the brass clock. Evan looked at it. 10:11. He stared. The second hand moved. 10:12. He looked away. "Why can't I leave?" Claire raised an eyebrow. "You can." Evan stood. He walked toward the front door. He opened it. Outside, Willow Street stretched beneath a pale blue sky. He stepped onto the sidewalk. A delivery truck passed. A woman walked a small dog. A man carried a newspaper. Everything looked normal. Evan turned around. The cafe was still behind him. He stepped back inside. The clock read 10:14. He checked his phone. 10:14. Same date. He looked at Claire. "Okay." She nodded. "Okay." He pointed at her. "I'm going to ask one question." "Only one. Don't push it." She smiled. "Go ahead." Why me? Claire looked at table 7. Then she looked at him. Because you're the one who drew it. Evan's face went cold. He hadn't told her about the notebook. He hadn't told anyone. How do you know about the drawing? Claire's expression changed. She seemed to realize she'd made a mistake. Claire. She looked away. Claire. I can't tell you everything. Why? Because then you won't make the choice yourself. What choice? She didn't answer. Evan walked toward the counter. Who else knows about the pencil? Claire stepped back. Evan. Who else? Your grandmother. She's dead. I know. Then who? Claire's eyes moved toward the wall. Evan followed her gaze. There was a photograph he hadn't noticed before. It showed a group of people standing outside the café. Most were strangers. But one wasn't. Evan walked closer. His breath stopped. His grandmother stood near the center. She looked younger. Much younger. Maybe 40. Beside her was a man Evan had never seen before. And beside that man was Claire. Except Claire looked exactly the same. Evan turned around. That's you. Claire said nothing. When was this taken? 1998. Evan looked at the photograph again. His grandmother was smiling. Not the polite smile Evan remembered from the last years of her life. A real smile. The kind that reached her eyes. He stared at it. Then something else caught his attention. At the far edge of the photograph was a little boy. Maybe 7 or 8 years old. He stood behind a chair. His face was turned slightly toward the camera. Evan stepped closer. His heart began to pound. The boy was wearing a red sweater. Dark hair. Round cheeks. And in his hand was a purple crayon. Evan whispered, "That's me." Claire closed her eyes. Evan turned. "You said I came here when I was ready." She didn't respond. "What happened here?" Claire finally looked at him. "Something your grandmother wanted you to remember." "What?" Claire glanced toward the back hallway. "That's not for me to tell." Evan's patience broke. "Then who is supposed to tell me?" The brass clock stopped. Both of them looked up. 10:17. The cafe became completely silent. Then came a sound from the back. A chair scraping across the floor. Evan looked toward the hallway. Claire whispered, "Don't." He looked at her. "Why?" "Because that's where the cafe keeps what people aren't ready to see." Evan stared at the hallway. Then he heard a voice. A young voice. A boy's voice. From somewhere behind the wooden door. "Grandma." Evan stopped breathing. He knew that voice. It was his own voice. From 28 years ago. Then the door slowly opened. And Evan saw himself. 8 years old. Standing in the hallway. Holding a purple crayon. The little boy looked directly at him. And smiled. "You're late," the boy said. Then the cafe lights went out. Chapter 4. The Boy in the Hallway. For several seconds, Evan couldn't see anything. The cafe had disappeared into darkness. He could hear Claire breathing somewhere nearby. He could hear the faint ticking of the brass clock. And then, from the hallway, came a small laugh. Evan's laugh. His 8-year-old laugh. "Claire." No answer. "Claire. I'm here." Her voice sounded closer now. Evan reached out and found the edge of the counter. "Where's the boy?" "He's still there." Evan swallowed. "Can you see him?" "Yes." "Then why can't I?" "You're not supposed to." That answer irritated him. "I'm standing in a room with a version of myself from 28 years ago, and you're telling me I'm not supposed to look at him?" "Evan." "What?" "Listen." He did. A faint scratching sound came from the hallway. Pencil against paper. Slow. Deliberate. Scratch. Pause. Scratch. Pause. Evan felt the hair rise on his arms. What is he drawing? Claire didn't answer. The lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then the cafe came back into view. Evan immediately looked toward the hallway. The boy was gone. The wooden door stood open. Beyond it was an empty corridor. Evan took one step forward. Claire caught his arm. "Don't." He looked down at her hand, then at her face. She released him. "Sorry. You're scared." Claire looked toward the hallway. "Yes. Of an 8-year-old? No." She paused. "Of what he remembers." Evan stared at her. The hallway suddenly felt much longer than it had a moment earlier. He took a breath. "Tell me what happened in 1998. Claire shook her head. "You need to see it." "See what?" "Yourself." Evan almost laughed. "I've seen myself. Not the way you think." Claire walked to the nearest table. She picked up a small wooden box. Evan recognized it immediately. His grandmother's box. The same box he'd found in the attic. Except this one looked new. Unworn. The wood wasn't scratched. The brass clasp wasn't tarnished. Claire placed it on the table. Evan didn't touch it. "Where did you get that?" "Your grandmother gave it to me." "When?" "After you left." "Left where?" Claire looked at him. "The café." Evan's eyes moved toward the hallway. "What happened to me?" Claire sat down. "You were 8. I know. You came here with your grandmother almost every Saturday." Evan frowned. He didn't remember. "She'd order tea. You'd get hot chocolate. You'd sit at table 7 and draw." Evan looked at the table. Something about that felt familiar. Not as a memory. More like a sensation. The smell of chocolate. Rain against glass. The sound of his grandmother turning a page. He closed his eyes. For half a second, he was 8 again. Then it disappeared. He opened them. "Why don't I remember?" "Because your grandmother asked you to forget." Evan stared at her. "Why?" Claire opened the wooden box. Inside was a purple crayon. Evan's heart dropped. It was short. Worn almost down to the paper. He knew it. He knew that crayon. He had carried it everywhere when he was 8. His grandmother had bought a box of 24 crayons for him one Christmas. But the purple one had always been his favorite. Evan reached toward it. Claire stopped him. "Wait. What?" She turned the crayon over. There was writing on the paper wrapper. A name. Evan. Evan sat down. "I don't understand." "You weren't supposed to." Claire closed the box. "Your grandmother believed some memories should be allowed to sleep." "That sounds poetic." "It wasn't." "What happened?" Claire looked toward the window. "Your grandmother was worried about you." "Why?" "Because you were drawing things that hadn't happened yet." Evan stopped. The words landed quietly. He remembered drawing. Lots of drawing. Houses. People. Animals. Roads. He had always been good at it. But he remembered one thing. A picture of a woman standing outside a house. A woman he'd never met. He had drawn her over and over. His grandmother had eventually taken the paper away. Evan looked at Claire. Who was she? Claire's expression softened. "You'll find out." "That's not an answer." "It is the only one I can give you." Evan stood. He walked toward the wall of photographs. He studied them. Couples. Families. People laughing. People holding coffee cups. People sitting at tables. Some photographs were dated. Evan frowned. The dates didn't make sense. The café was supposed to have disappeared decades ago. Yet there were photographs from years afterward. He pointed. "What happened in 2018? Claire didn't answer. "And 2011? "Nothing." "Claire." She finally said. "The café doesn't belong to 1 year." Evan turned. "What does that mean?" "It appears when someone needs it." "That's impossible." "Yes." "That's your explanation." "No." Claire looked at him. "My explanation is that some places become important enough that time stops being the most useful way to understand them." Evan stared at her. That's exactly the kind of sentence people say when they have no idea what they're talking about. Claire smiled. "Your grandmother used to say the same thing. That shut him up." Evan walked back to table 7. He sat down. The coffee was still there. He picked it up. It was warm. He took a sip. It tasted exactly like the coffee his grandmother used to make. Not café coffee. Not good coffee. Just coffee. Dark. A little bitter. Too hot. The kind she drank every morning. Evan put the cup down. His eyes stung. He looked away. Claire noticed. She didn't say anything. That helped. After a moment, Evan said, "Did she know I'd come back?" "Yes." "When?" "Years ago." "How many?" Claire looked toward the old brass clock. 28. Evan frowned. "That's impossible." "Your grandmother didn't think so." Evan leaned back. He looked at the photographs again. What was she waiting for? Claire's answer came softly. "You." Evan stared at her. "Why?" Claire stood. "Because you left something here." "What?" "Your first drawing." Evan looked at the hallway. "The one from the notebook?" "No." Claire walked toward the back. "The one you made before you understood what drawing meant." Evan followed. They reached the wooden door. Claire pushed it open. The hallway beyond was narrow. The walls were covered with drawings. Hundreds of them. Some were childish. Some were detailed. Some were nothing more than lines. Evan walked slowly. He recognized the handwriting on the dates. His own. August 4th, 1998. August 11th, 1998. September 2nd, 1998. His stomach tightened. He reached toward one. It showed the café. Another showed the house on Maple Street. Another showed a woman standing beside a blue car. Another showed a little boy holding hands with an older woman. Evan stopped. His grandmother. He touched the page. Then he saw the last drawing. It was larger than the others. Pinned to the end of the hallway. A house. His grandmother's house. Except the house was surrounded by trees. And standing on the porch was Evan. Not 8 years old. Not 30. Older. Maybe 50. Maybe 60. The man in the drawing was standing beside a woman. The woman had dark brown hair. She was smiling. Evan couldn't see her face clearly. Underneath the drawing were words written in his childhood handwriting. When Evan comes home, he won't be alone. Evan stepped backward. Who is she? Claire stood behind him. I don't know. You're lying. I've never seen her. You know everything else. No. Claire's voice became firm. I know what the café allows me to know. Evan looked at her. What does that mean? It means the café isn't giving you answers. Then what is it doing? Giving you choices. Evan stared at the drawing. The older version of himself. The unknown woman. The house. He thought about his life in New York. His empty apartment. The work he no longer enjoyed. The relationships he'd avoided because he was always busy. The constant feeling that something had been misplaced. Something important. Something he couldn't name. He looked at the drawing again. Why did Grandma want me to see this? Claire smiled sadly. Because she knew you'd spend your whole life looking backward if someone didn't show you there was still a future. Evan didn't respond. The sentence hurt. Not because it was cruel. Because it sounded exactly like something his grandmother would have said. He touched the edge of the drawing. The paper was warm. Then he noticed something. At the bottom corner was a tiny blue mark. A bird. He recognized it immediately. His grandmother's bluebird. But beneath it was another line. One he'd never seen before. A sentence. Written in fresh black ink. You haven't drawn the woman yet. Evan stared at it. Claire. She stepped closer. What? He pointed. Her expression changed. She hadn't expected it either. That's new. How do you know? Because I was here yesterday. Evan looked at her. Yesterday? Yes. Here? Yes. But the café wasn't here. Claire smiled. That's the point. Evan looked back at the sentence. Then he remembered the blue pencil. He pulled it from his jacket. The moment it appeared, the hallway became completely still. Claire looked at it. Don't. Evan held it tightly. Why? Because once you draw her, the cafe won't be able to hide anything from you. Evan looked toward the end of the hallway. Maybe that's what I want. Claire shook her head. No. Why? Because you don't know what you're asking for. Evan thought about it. Then he smiled faintly. Neither did Harold. Claire looked at him. What? Evan held up the blue pencil. Harold. For the first time, Claire laughed. A genuine laugh. You really did love that book. My grandmother read it constantly. She said you used to draw roads everywhere. I did. Why? Evan looked down at the pencil. I wanted to know where they went. Claire's smile faded. Then maybe you should start there. Evan looked at the blank wall. He lifted the blue pencil and began to draw. A road. Slowly. One line at a time. The pencil moved smoothly across the wall. Claire watched without speaking. The road curved, then disappeared behind a hill. Evan added trees. A mailbox. A house. Then a woman standing on the porch. He stopped. His hand went still. He didn't know her. But somehow, while drawing her, he felt as though he'd been missing her for years. He added dark brown hair. A simple blue sweater. One hand resting against the porch railing. Then he drew her face. The instant he finished the eyes, the brass clock in the cafe began ticking again. Tick, tick, tick. The hallway lights flickered. Claire whispered, Evan. He lowered the pencil. The woman in the drawing was looking directly at him. And then, very slowly, she smiled. Chapter 5. The Woman in the Drawing. Evan dropped the pencil. It hit the wooden floor and rolled beneath the narrow table against the wall. Neither he nor Claire moved. The woman in the drawing was still smiling. Not a dramatic smile. Not the kind people give when they're posing for a photograph. It was small, private, almost familiar. Evan stared at her. He couldn't explain why his chest felt tight. He had drawn strangers before. Thousands of them. Faces for children's books. Faces for advertisements. Faces from imagination. Sometimes he could create a believable person in less than 5 minutes. But this was different. He hadn't invented her. At least, that's what it felt like. He knew the shape of her face. He knew the way her hair fell against her shoulder. He knew she had a tiny crease beside her left eye when she smiled. And somehow, without knowing why, he knew that she preferred tea to coffee. Evan stepped closer to the drawing. Who are you? The woman didn't answer. Of course she didn't. She was ink and pencil on an old wall. Evan knew that. He knew it perfectly. Still, some part of him waited. Claire walked beside him. She's beautiful. Evan glanced at her. That's your contribution? Claire smiled. I thought you might appreciate it. I don't know her. No. I've never seen her. I know. Then why does she look familiar? Claire didn't answer. Evan turned back toward the drawing. There was something about the woman's eyes. Not their color. The expression. She looked at him as though she had been waiting. Not for him to draw her. For him to remember her. Evan rubbed his forehead. This is ridiculous. Claire folded her arms. You've said that several times. Because it is. You came into a cafe that doesn't exist, walked into a hallway that shouldn't be here, met your 8-year-old self, and drew a woman you've never met. When you say it like that, it sounds ridiculous. Claire looked at him. Does it? Evan didn't answer. He crouched down and retrieved the blue pencil. The moment his fingers closed around it, something happened. A memory. Not a picture. A feeling. He was 8 years old. Sitting at table 7. His feet didn't touch the floor. His grandmother was sitting across from him. She was holding a cup of tea. And someone was laughing. A woman. A young woman. Evan couldn't see her. But he heard her voice. You're cheating. His younger self laughed. I am not. You drew the road after you knew where it went. That's not cheating. That's exactly cheating. His grandmother laughed. Then the memory vanished. Evan opened his eyes. Claire was watching him. You remembered. He nodded slowly. Someone was here. Yes. Who? Claire's expression became cautious. I don't know. Stop saying that. I don't know her. But you know she existed. Yes. Why? Claire looked toward the café. Because everyone remembers her. Evan stared at her. Everyone. Not everyone. Claire corrected herself. Everyone who mattered. That sentence made Evan uncomfortable. He stood. Tell me everything you know. Claire looked at him for a long time. Then she walked toward the café. Evan followed. They returned to table 7. Claire sat down. Evan sat opposite her. The café looked completely ordinary again. The brass clock ticked. Rain had begun against the windows. A coffee machine hummed softly behind the counter. Somewhere outside, a car passed over wet pavement. It could have been any café in any small American town. Except for the fact that Evan knew it wasn't. Claire wrapped both hands around her mug. Her name was Lily. Evan waited. She came here in the summer of 1998. How old was she? 24. Where was she from? Not Maplewood. Why was she here? Claire looked toward the window. She was passing through. Passing through what? Her life, I suppose. Evan smiled faintly. That's vague. People who are lost usually are. Was she lost? Yes. Where was she going? Claire looked at him. That's what you were supposed to find out. Evan frowned. What does that mean? Your grandmother believed you would meet her again. Meet Lily. Claire nodded. Why? Because you drew her. Evan stared at the table. That's not an explanation. It was enough for Ruth. Not for me. Claire smiled. Your grandmother understood something you haven't yet. What? That you don't always need to know how something happens to know that it matters. Evan leaned back. He hated how much that sounded like her. Did Lily know my grandmother? Yes. How? They worked together. Here. Yes. Doing what? Claire hesitated. Helping people. Evan laughed. Your café was a therapy office? No. Then what? Claire looked toward the old photographs. People came here when they didn't know what to do next. Evan thought about the sentence on the receipt. Draw the next place. What did Lily need help with? Claire's expression softened. She was supposed to marry someone. Evan's attention sharpened. What? Her fiancé was back in Ohio. Back in Ohio? Yes. And she came here? For 3 weeks. Why? Claire took a sip of coffee. She wasn't sure she wanted to marry him. Evan looked toward the photograph wall. Did she? No. Did she tell him? Yes. What happened? Claire smiled sadly. He came to Maplewood. Evan frowned. When? 2 weeks later. Did they get back together? No. Then what? Claire's eyes moved toward table 7. He sat there. Evan looked at the table. Table 7? Yes. For how long? 3 hours. Alone? Yes. Then? He left. Evan waited. That's the whole story. Claire nodded. Not even close. She stood. Evan watched her walk toward the photograph wall. She stopped beneath one frame. Come here. Evan approached. Claire pointed. The photograph showed a young man sitting at table 7. He was probably 26. Dark hair. Plain white shirt. A serious expression. Evan recognized the table. That's Lily's fiancé. Yes. What's his name? Michael. Evan stared at the photograph. There was something strangely familiar about him. Then he noticed something in the corner. A little boy. Red sweater. Purple crayon. Evan. He stepped closer. Why am I in this photograph? Claire didn't answer. Evan looked at her. Why? Because you were here. I don't remember. You were 8. That doesn't explain anything. Claire sighed. Your grandmother brought you here that afternoon. Why? Because she didn't want you at home. Why? Your parents were fighting. Evan went still. He remembered that. Not the details. Just the feeling. His parents' voices. A slammed door. His mother crying. His father leaving. His grandmother arriving. A long car ride. He had forgotten the rest. Claire continued. You were angry. Evan looked at the photograph. I was always angry. Not like that. What happened? You refused to talk. Evan smiled bitterly. That sounds like me. You drew instead. He looked at the photograph again. What did I draw? Claire pointed toward his younger self. The boy was holding the purple crayon. On the table in front of him was a sheet of paper. Evan could barely see it. But the image was clear enough. A road. A house. A woman. The same woman he'd just drawn. Lily. Evan felt cold. Why did I draw her? Claire shook her head. You didn't know her yet. What? You drew her before you met her. Evan stared at her. That's impossible. Claire's eyes met his. Your grandmother said the same thing. Evan looked at the photograph again. His younger self wasn't looking at the paper. He was looking toward the cafe entrance. Toward someone standing outside the frame. Lily. Evan's throat tightened. Did I meet her? Yes. When? 3 days later. Evan looked at Claire. Where? Here. Then why don't I remember? Claire's expression became sad. Because you weren't supposed to. Why? Because Lily asked your grandmother to make sure you forgot. Evan felt a strange mixture of anger and confusion. Why would she ask that? Claire walked back toward the table. Because Lily knew she was leaving. Leaving where? Home. To Ohio. Claire shook her head. Somewhere else. Evan frowned. Where? Claire looked at the rain. California. Evan sat down. Did she go? Yes. Did she come back? Claire didn't answer. Evan understood. No. Claire looked at him. Not until now. Evan's eyes narrowed. What does that mean? Claire said nothing. He stood. You said she didn't come back. She didn't. Then why did you say, until now? Claire's silence told him enough. Evan felt his heartbeat increase. He looked around the cafe. The photographs. The tables. The hallway. The drawing. The blue pencil. Everything suddenly felt connected. He walked toward the front window. She's alive. Claire didn't answer. Claire. She was. Evan turned. What does that mean? Claire looked toward the door. Sometimes people leave a place long before they leave a life. Evan stared at her. Stop talking like my grandmother. Claire smiled faintly. I liked your grandmother. Everyone seems to. She was difficult. That surprised him. Evan laughed. Finally. Something honest. Claire smiled. She was stubborn. She worried too much. She kept secrets that weren't hers to keep. Evan's smile faded. Why did she keep this from me? Claire looked at him. Because she loved you. That's not an excuse. No. Claire's voice became softer. But it was her reason. Evan sat back down. He looked at his hands. Where is Lily? Claire took a breath. That's what the cafe wants you to find. Evan looked up. The cafe. Yes. Why? Because you drew her. That still doesn't explain anything. Claire reached into her cardigan pocket. She pulled out an old photograph. Then she placed it on the table. Evan stared at it. It showed Lily. Older. Maybe 50. She stood outside a small house. The photograph was clearly taken years after 1998. Evan picked it up. Where was this taken? Claire pointed toward the bottom. There was a handwritten address. Evan's eyes widened. He knew that address. It was in Vermont, about 2 hours from Maplewood. She's there. Claire shook her head. Not anymore. Evan looked up. Then where? Claire's eyes moved toward the blue pencil. You drew her house. Evan remembered. The house in his drawing. The trees. The porch. The woman. He hadn't realized it before. But now he could see it. The photograph and his drawing were the same house. Almost exactly. Evan stood. I'm going there. Claire nodded. Tomorrow. Today. Evan. Why tomorrow? Because the cafe closes at sunset. He looked toward the windows. The rain had become heavier. Outside, the street was nearly empty. How long does it take to get there? 2 hours. Then I'll leave now. Claire shook her head. You can't. Why? Because if you leave before sunset, you'll forget what you saw. Evan stopped. What? You'll remember the cafe. You just said I'd forget. Not everything. Then what? Claire looked toward the drawing in the hallway. You'll remember the woman. Evan's voice became quiet. And I'll forget everything else. Yes. Why? Claire's eyes softened. Because that's how the cafe protects people. Evan looked at the front door. Then at table 7. Then at the blue pencil. He didn't understand the cafe. He didn't understand the drawings. He didn't understand his grandmother. And he certainly didn't understand Lily. But one thing had become painfully clear. For the first time in 28 years, he had a direction. He took out his phone. The date still read August 10th, 2026. He opened the map. The Vermont address was still there. He saved it. Then he looked at Claire. I'm coming back tomorrow. She nodded. Good. Evan reached the door. His hand touched the brass handle. Claire. Yes. He turned. Did Lily ever love Michael? Claire thought about it. Yes. Then why did she leave? Claire's answer came quietly. Because loving someone and knowing how to live with them are two different things. Evan stood there. Then Claire added, and sometimes the hardest thing isn't leaving someone you love. What is? Admitting that you have been waiting for the wrong person to come back. Evan looked at her. For some reason, he thought about his own life. The apartment in New York. The relationship he'd ended 2 years ago. The emails he never answered. The phone calls he kept postponing. All the people he had quietly convinced himself he'd have time for later. He opened the door. Cold rain touched his face. He stepped outside. Then he heard Claire behind him. Evan. He turned. She was standing beneath the warm cafe lights. Bring the pencil. He looked down at his pocket. Why? Claire's expression was serious now. Because tomorrow, you're going to meet the woman you drew. Evan's heart stopped for a moment. Lily. Claire shook her head. No. She looked toward the rain-soaked street. Someone else. Then the door closed. Evan stood alone on Willow Street. He looked back. The brown paper had returned to the cafe windows. The for lease sign was back. There was no light inside. No tables. No Claire. No cafe. Just the empty storefront. Evan slowly reached into his pocket. The blue pencil was still there. And on his phone, beneath the Vermont address he'd saved, a new location had appeared. He hadn't entered it. He hadn't searched for it. It simply said, Table 7. Then, underneath, tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. Evan stared at the screen. For the first time in years, he felt something he had almost forgotten how to feel. Not certainty. Not happiness. Something quieter. Something more useful. Hope. Chapter 6. The Road He Never Took. Evan didn't sleep much that night. He tried. He turned off the lights at 11. He put his phone face down on the nightstand. He even opened the bedroom window because his grandmother had always said that cool air helped an overactive mind settle down. It didn't work. At 12:14, he checked the time. At 1:07, he checked again. At 2:31, he got up and made tea. At 3:18, he found himself standing in the hallway, staring at the attic stairs. He thought about going up. He didn't. There were some things he had learned about himself over the years. When he was nervous, he worked. When he was lonely, he stayed busy. When something frightened him, he tried to understand it. And when he didn't understand something, he kept digging until he found an explanation. The café was a problem because there was no explanation. Not one that made sense, anyway. So at 3:20 in the morning, Evan did something he hadn't done since college. He sat at his grandmother's kitchen table and did absolutely nothing. He listened to the refrigerator. He listened to the rain. He watched the steam rise from his tea. And slowly, his thoughts became quieter. He thought about the woman in the drawing, Lily. Then he thought about the other woman Claire had mentioned. Someone else. He wondered who she was. He wondered why he'd drawn her. Most of all, he wondered why he felt strangely calm about it. He should have been frightened. Instead, there was an odd sense of recognition, as though some part of him had been waiting for the next morning. At 4:02, Evan finally fell asleep at the kitchen table. He dreamed about a road. It stretched through the countryside beneath a pale autumn sky. He was driving. The road seemed familiar. On the passenger seat was the blue pencil. Beside it was a woman. Evan couldn't see her face. She was looking out the window. Then she said, "You took the long way." Evan looked at her. "Where are we going?" She smiled. "Home." He woke at 7:46. The tea was cold. His neck hurt. The rain had stopped. And on the kitchen table, beside his hand, was the blue pencil. Evan stared at it. He was certain he'd left it upstairs. He picked it up. Nothing happened. No strange message. No changing drawing. No mysterious voice. Just a pencil. He almost laughed. "Good morning to you too." He showered, packed a bag, and left by 9. The drive to Vermont took just under 2 hours. For the first 40 minutes, Evan listened to music. Then he turned it off. The landscape slowly changed. Maplewood disappeared behind him. The roads became narrower. The houses became farther apart. The trees grew thicker. Autumn had started early that year. Red and gold leaves covered the shoulders of the road. The sky was clear, and sunlight passed through the trees in long golden strips. Evan liked this part of the country. He had forgotten that. Or maybe he hadn't forgotten. Maybe he'd simply stopped looking. That thought bothered him. For years, he had told himself he left Maplewood because there was nothing there for him. New York had everything. Opportunity. Work. People. Noise. A life. Maplewood had been a place for children. A place to grow up. A place to leave. But as Evan drove deeper into Vermont, he began to wonder whether he'd mistaken leaving for moving forward. His phone's navigation led him to a small town called Fairbrook. He slowed as he entered. There was a gas station, a grocery store, a diner, a small church, and a bookstore that looked as though it had been open since 1952. The address Claire had given him was on the edge of town. Evan drove past a row of houses. Then another. Finally, he found it. A narrow dirt road. He pulled over. His phone said, "You have arrived." Evan stared through the windshield. There was no house. Only trees. He checked the address. Correct. He looked around. Nothing. Of course. He got out. The air smelled like wet leaves. He walked down the dirt road. After a few minutes, he saw a mailbox. Old. Blue. The number matched. Evan stopped. Behind the mailbox was a narrow path through the trees. He followed it. The house appeared slowly. First the roof. Then the porch. Then the windows. Evan stopped walking. His heart began to pound. It was the house from his drawing. Exactly. Same porch. Same windows. Same flower pot. Even the crooked wooden railing. Evan took the blue pencil from his pocket. He didn't know why. He simply held it. Then he walked toward the house. The front door was unlocked. He knocked anyway. Nothing. He knocked again. Still nothing. Hello. Silence. Evan opened the door. Sorry, he said to the empty house. The interior was warm. Not abandoned. There were books on the shelves. A wool blanket on the couch. A ceramic bowl filled with apples. Someone lived here. Evan stepped inside. Hello. A floorboard creaked upstairs. Evan froze. Hello. A voice answered. Just a minute. It was a woman's voice. Evan's heartbeat increased. He looked toward the staircase. Footsteps. Slow. Then a woman appeared. She was around his age. Maybe 30. Dark brown hair fell loosely around her shoulders. She wore a blue sweater and jeans. She stopped halfway down the stairs. Evan couldn't move. He knew her. Not from memory. Not from life. From the drawing. The crease beside her left eye. The shape of her face. The way she looked at him. It was her. The woman from the drawing. Neither of them spoke. Finally she said, Evan. His throat felt dry. Yes. She came down the remaining stairs. You came. Evan stared at her. You know me. She smiled. I know your name. That's not what I asked. I know. She reached the bottom of the stairs. For a moment, they simply stood there. Then Evan asked, Who are you? The woman hesitated. My name is Nora. Evan's fingers tightened around the pencil. Nora. The name felt familiar. Not from memory. From somewhere else. Did my grandmother know you? Nora's expression changed. Yes. How? She helped me once. When? Years ago. Evan looked around the room. Were you here before? Nora nodded. When? 1998. His stomach dropped. You knew Lily. Nora's eyes widened. How do you know that name? Evan almost laughed. That's a very long story. Nora looked at the pencil. Her expression changed again. Where did you get that? Evan followed her gaze. The attic. Your grandmother's attic? Yes. Nora took a slow breath. She kept it. You know what it is. I know what it was. Evan held the pencil up. What is it? Nora looked toward the window. Something your grandmother didn't want you to have until you were ready. Evan's patience was disappearing. Everyone keeps saying that. Nora smiled. Then maybe it's true. Evan looked at her. Why did my grandmother send me here? Nora's smile disappeared. She didn't. Claire said. Claire. Nora went completely still. Evan noticed. You know Claire. Nora looked at him. Yes. Who is she? Nora didn't answer. Is she real? Nora's eyes softened. Yes. Then why does the cafe disappear? She stared at him. You've been there. It wasn't a question. Evan nodded. Nora sat on the couch. Then you're closer than I thought. Closer to what? Nora looked up. Your grandmother's promise. Evan sat opposite her. What promise? Nora was silent for several seconds. Then she said, Before your grandmother died, she called me. Evan's chest tightened. When? 3 months ago. He stared at her. She knew she was dying. Yes. What did she say? Nora looked toward the fireplace. She told me you were coming home. Evan swallowed. Why? She said you had forgotten something. What? Nora looked at him. Not something. Then what? Someone. Evan thought about Lily. Lily. Nora shook her head. No. Then who? Nora looked down at the blue pencil. Yourself. Evan frowned. That doesn't make sense. It will. That's what everyone says. Nora smiled. Your grandmother was very good at making people wait. Evan almost smiled. That sounded exactly right. He looked around the room. Where's Lily? Nora's expression changed. She died. The room became silent. Evan didn't expect that. When? 7 years ago. How? Cancer. Evan looked down. I'm sorry. Nora nodded. She was sick for a long time. Did she ever come back to Maplewood? No. Did she ever see my grandmother again? Nora hesitated. Yes. When? Before she died. Evan looked up. Where? Here. Evan stared at her. Lily came here? Yes. Why? Nora looked toward a framed photograph on the mantel. Evan stood. The photograph showed 3 women. His grandmother, Lily, Nora. They were standing on the porch of the house. Evan approached. The photograph was dated October 2018. His grandmother looked older. Lily looked older too. But Nora looked almost exactly as she did now. Evan turned. How old are you? Nora smiled. 30. You were here in 1998. Yes. You were 24. Nora nodded. Evan stared at her. Then why don't you look older? Nora's smile faded. I wondered when you'd ask. Evan sat down again. What's happening? Nora took a long breath. I don't know how much I should tell you. Try all of it. She smiled. That's very much like you. You don't know me. Not yet. The words caught him. Not yet. Nora looked toward the window. Your grandmother believed you would come back eventually. Why? Because she knew what happened the night you left. Evan frowned. What night? The night you stopped drawing. His expression changed. He hadn't thought about that. He had drawn constantly as a child. Then, almost overnight, he'd stopped. By 12, he barely drew. By 15, he hated it. By 20, it was simply something he did for money. How do you know? Nora pointed toward the blue pencil. Because Lily gave you that. Evan stared at her. What? Lily gave you the pencil? No. Yes. I found it in my grandmother's box. Your grandmother kept it. But Lily gave it to me? Nora nodded. Why? Nora's eyes became distant. Because you were afraid. Evan remembered something. A flash. A rainy night. His grandmother's car. A woman's hand. A blue pencil being placed into his palm. And a voice saying, "Draw somewhere safe." The memory vanished. Evan stood abruptly. Nora watched him. You remembered. He put a hand against his forehead. I heard her. Lily. Yes. What did she say? Evan looked at Nora. Draw somewhere safe. Nora's eyes filled with tears. She looked away. What's wrong? Nothing. Nora. She wiped beneath one eye. That's what she told me too. Evan sat down slowly. The room felt different now. Less mysterious. More human. That somehow made everything harder. He looked at Nora. What happened that night? Nora didn't answer. Evan waited. Finally, she said, Your parents were fighting. I remember that. Your father left. I remember. Your mother wanted to go after him. Evan nodded. And your grandmother took you to the café. He closed his eyes. The memory returned. Table 7. Hot chocolate. Rain. His grandmother crying quietly. Lily sitting beside him. Nora standing behind the counter. A purple crayon. Then Lily giving him the blue pencil. He opened his eyes. What happened after that? Nora looked directly at him. You drew a road. Evan frowned. A road? Yes. Where did it go? Nora smiled sadly. Home. Evan's eyes moved toward the blue pencil. Then he noticed something. The pencil had become shorter. He hadn't sharpened it. He held it up. The tip was worn. Nora saw it. Her face went pale. What's wrong? You drew today. Yes. You used the pencil. Yes. Nora stood. Evan, what did you draw? A woman. Who? I don't know. Nora stared at him. Then she whispered. Did she have dark hair? Yes. Blue sweater. Yes. Did she smile? Evan nodded. Nora sat down. Her hands were trembling. What? She looked at him. You didn't draw a stranger. Who did I draw? Nora's eyes met his. You drew me. Evan couldn't speak. Nora slowly reached toward the mantel. She took down the old photograph. The three women. His grandmother. Lily. Nora. She turned it over. There was writing on the back. Evan recognized his grandmother's handwriting. Nora handed it to him. He read, October 2018. Some roads take longer than others. But Evan always finds his way home. Evan looked at Nora. What does this mean? Nora's eyes were wet. I don't know. But Grandma did. Yes. Then why didn't she tell me? Maybe she wanted you to choose. Choose what? Nora looked toward the blue pencil, then toward the front door, and finally back at Evan. Whether you want the life you drew. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. A few yellow leaves landed against the window. Evan thought about the drawing, the house, the porch, the woman, the older version of himself. He looked at Nora. You're the woman. She nodded. Why? I don't know. Then who does? Nora looked toward the road. Maybe the café. Evan almost laughed. Of course. Then Nora stood. It's almost 6. Evan checked his phone. 5:41 p.m. Nora picked up her jacket. Where are you going? Maplewood. Why? Because you have a reservation. Evan frowned. What reservation? Nora looked at him. Table 7. His phone vibrated. Evan pulled it from his pocket. A new notification appeared. No sender. No number. Just a single message. 6:30 p.m. Then another message appeared. Bring Nora. Evan slowly looked up. Nora had seen it too. Neither spoke. Outside, the late afternoon sun was beginning to disappear behind the trees. Nora picked up her keys. Come on. Evan stood. Where? She opened the door. To find out why your grandmother spent 28 years drawing the same road. And for the first time, Evan understood something. Maybe the café hadn't brought him back to Maplewood. Maybe he had been drawing the road home his entire life. Chapter 7. Table 7. They drove back to Maplewood separately. Nora went ahead in her old blue sedan. Evan followed behind. He didn't know why they hadn't simply ridden together. Maybe because neither of them knew what to say. Maybe because the day had become too strange to share the small space of a car. Or maybe because Evan needed the 20 minutes alone. He kept thinking about the message. Bring Nora. He had shown it to her. She hadn't asked who sent it. She hadn't asked how it appeared. She had simply stared at the screen and said, It's time. Evan wasn't sure whether that was comforting. At 6:19, they reached Willow Street. The sun was low. The sky had turned pale orange behind the trees. Evan parked across from the old storefront. Nora stopped her car behind him. For several seconds, neither moved. The building looked exactly as it had that morning. Dusty windows. Brown paper. For lease. Evan stepped out. Nora joined him. Do you see it? Evan asked. See what? The café. Nora looked at the building. Her face changed. Evan watched her carefully. What's wrong? Nothing. Nora. She pointed toward the window. It's not there yet. What does that mean? Wait. They stood together on the sidewalk. A minute passed. Then another. Nothing happened. Evan checked his phone. 6:27. Nora folded her arms. Maybe we're early. Maybe. At 6:29, a breeze moved down the street. The paper covering the windows began to flutter. Evan heard something. A faint metallic sound. Ding. Like a bell. He looked at the door. The brown paper disappeared. The for lease sign disappeared. Warm yellow light filled the windows. The café was there. Evan stared. Nora closed her eyes. What? Nothing. Why did you do that? She opened them. I haven't been here in 8 years. Evan looked at her. You've been here before? Yes. When? 2018. He remembered the photograph. His grandmother. Lily. Nora. The porch. That's when Lily came to see Grandma. Yes. Why? Nora looked through the window. She wanted to say goodbye. To Grandma? Yes. And you? Nora smiled faintly. I was there. Evan pushed open the cafe door. The bell rang. Warm air wrapped around them. Coffee. Cinnamon. Wood. Rain. Everything felt exactly as it had before. But this time, there was something different. The cafe was full. Not crowded. Just occupied. A man reading a newspaper. 2 women talking quietly near the window. An elderly couple sharing a slice of pie. A young mother helping a little boy with a coloring book. None of them seemed surprised to see Evan. Or Nora. Evan looked at Nora. Do they see us? Of course. Who are they? People. That's not helpful. She smiled. It isn't supposed to be. Then Evan saw table 7. Empty. A small ceramic cup sat in the center. 2 chairs faced each other. One had been pulled out. Nora stopped. Go ahead. Evan walked toward it. He sat. Nora sat opposite him. The moment she did, the cafe became quieter. Not silent. Just softer. The people around them seemed farther away. Evan looked at the clock. 6:30. Exactly. A waitress approached. She looked about 25. Brown hair. White shirt. Dark apron. She smiled at Evan. Coffee. Evan looked at Nora. She nodded. 2. The waitress walked away. Evan leaned forward. Do you know her? No. Then why are you acting like this is normal? Because it isn't the first time I've been here. That's not what I mean. Nora looked at him. I know. Evan looked around. The walls were covered with photographs. Some he recognized. Most he didn't. Then he noticed something. One of the photographs had been taken in 1998. His grandmother stood beside Lily. And a young woman stood on the other side. Nora. Evan stared. Nora. I know. You haven't aged. She looked at the photograph. No. Why? I don't know. You keep saying that. Because I don't know. Evan leaned back. What do you know? Nora thought for a moment. I know that the cafe isn't a normal place. Clearly. I know it doesn't appear for everyone. Who does it appear for? People who are standing at a crossroads. Evan frowned. A literal crossroads? No. She looked at him. A life crossroads. Evan thought about that. Like someone who doesn't know what to do. Yes. That's everyone. Nora smiled. Not everyone admits it. The waitress returned. She placed 2 cups on the table. Evan looked at the coffee. He didn't touch it. Why did you come here in 1998? Nora looked down. I was 24. I know. I had just left college. Where? Boston. She looked toward the window. I thought I knew exactly what I wanted. What did you want? To become a writer. Evan smiled. That makes sense. Why? You talk like one. Nora raised an eyebrow. What does that mean? Nothing. She smiled. You're a terrible liar. Evan looked at his coffee. Did you become one? A writer? Yes. Not really. What happened? Nora took a sip. Life. Evan waited. She continued. I moved to California. Got married. Got divorced. Took a job I didn't like. Lost the job. Took another one. My father got sick. I came back east. She shrugged. Nothing unusual. That's a lot. It's a life. Evan looked at her. You seem okay with it. I'm not sure I have another option. That answer stayed with him. He knew exactly what she meant. The waitress passed their table. Evan watched her. Then he looked at the photographs. "Where's Lily?" Nora's expression softened. "Gone." "I know." "No." Nora looked at him. "You don't." Evan waited. "Lily died 7 years ago." "Yes. But before she died, she told me something." "What?" Nora looked toward the back hallway. "She said the cafe would bring us back together." Evan's stomach tightened. "Us? You and me? Why?" She didn't explain. Evan stared at her. "Did you know me before 1998? "No." "But I drew you." "Yes." "Why?" "I don't know." Evan sighed. "You know, for someone who apparently has all the answers, you know surprisingly little." Nora smiled. "I've been asking the same questions for 28 years. That silenced him. 28 years. He looked at the blue pencil in his hand. He hadn't realized he'd taken it out. Nora noticed. "You brought it." "Yes." "You shouldn't have." "Claire said I should." Nora's face changed. "What did Claire say?" "She said I'd need it." Nora looked around the cafe. "Where is she?" "I don't know." "You don't." "She wasn't there when I arrived." Nora frowned. "She should be." "Why?" "Because she always is." Evan looked toward the counter. "No Claire. Just the waitress." He turned back. "Do you remember her?" "Of course." "How old was she?" Nora hesitated. "About 30. "When?" 1998. Evan stared. "She's still 30. Nora nodded. "Exactly." Neither spoke for a moment. Then Evan heard something. A soft scraping sound. He looked down. The blue pencil was moving. Not by itself. His hand was holding it. But his fingers were moving without him consciously deciding to. The pencil touched the paper napkin beside his coffee. A line appeared. Evan immediately pulled his hand away. Nora stared. "What did you draw?" Evan looked down. A road. Again. Only this time, it wasn't empty. There was a car. A blue sedan. Nora's car. Evan's eyes widened. "That's your car." Nora leaned closer. The road continued. Then another line appeared. A house. Nora's house in Fairbrook. Then a tree. Then a mailbox. Then a small figure standing beside it. Evan froze. "That's Lily." Nora stared. The figure had dark hair. A long coat. One hand resting against the mailbox. But she wasn't alone. There was another figure beside her. A man. Evan looked closer. His face was barely visible. Then he recognized the shape. The dark hair. The shoulders. The posture. His heart started pounding. "That's Michael." Nora looked at him. "Yes." Evan stared at the drawing. "Why are they together?" Nora didn't answer. The pencil moved again. This time Evan watched his own hand. A second road appeared. It crossed the first. At the intersection, the pencil stopped. Then it drew a small circle. Evan looked at Nora. "What's that?" She shook her head. "I don't know." The cafe became quiet. Every conversation stopped. Every cup became still. Evan looked around. The people were staring at him. The elderly couple. The mother and child. The two women. The man with the newspaper. All of them. Then the front door opened. The bell rang. Ding. Evan turned. An elderly man walked inside. He wore a brown wool coat and carried a folded umbrella. He looked around the cafe. Then his eyes found Evan. The man stopped. His face went pale. Nora whispered, "Oh." Evan looked at her. "Who is that?" She didn't answer. The old man walked toward them. Slowly. His eyes never left Evan. When he reached table 7, he stopped. For a moment, he seemed unable to speak. Then he said, "You look exactly like her." Evan's heart tightened. "Like who?" The man's eyes filled with tears. "Your grandmother." Evan stood. "You knew her." The man nodded. How? The old man looked at Nora, then at the pencil, then back at Evan. She told me you'd come. Evan felt a familiar frustration. Everyone keeps telling me that. The man smiled sadly. She was very certain. About what? That you would eventually return. Why? The old man pulled out the chair beside Evan. He sat. Then he looked toward the wall. At a photograph. Evan followed his gaze. The photograph showed his grandmother in 1998. She was sitting at table 7. Beside her was the same old man, except he was young. And beside him was Lily. Evan's eyes widened. You knew Lily too? Yes. What happened to her? The old man looked down. She left. I know. No. He shook his head. Not California. Evan frowned. Then where? The man leaned forward. She came back. Evan stared. When? 7 years ago. Before she died. Yes. Why? The old man looked toward Nora. Nora's face had gone pale. Because she was looking for you. Evan couldn't breathe. Me? Yes. But why? The old man looked at the blue pencil. Because she had something that belonged to you. What? He reached inside his coat, pulled out a small envelope, and placed it on table 7. Evan stared at it. His name was written on the front. Evan Miller. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Not his grandmother's. Not Claire's. Not Nora's. He looked at the old man. Who wrote this? The man said, Lily. Evan's fingers trembled as he reached for it. Nora whispered, Evan, wait. He stopped. Why? Because once you open it, you can't go back. Evan looked at the envelope, then at Nora. What does that mean? Nora's eyes were fixed on the letter. It means you'll finally know why she left. Evan looked down again. The envelope was old. The paper had yellowed. There was no stamp. No address. Only his name. He carefully opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The first line made his heart stop. Dear Evan, you won't remember me. He looked at Nora, then back at the letter. And underneath the first sentence was another. But one day, you will remember why I asked you to forget me. Chapter 8. The letter Lily left behind. Evan read the sentence again. But one day, you will remember why I asked you to forget me. He didn't move. Around him, the café had gone strangely quiet. Even the rain seemed farther away. Nora sat across from him, watching his face. The old man beside him lowered his eyes. Evan looked at the handwriting. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't perfectly neat. There were places where the ink became darker, as if the person writing had stopped and started again. He continued, If you are reading this, your grandmother was right. You came back. Evan swallowed. His grandmother had known. Not guessed. Known. He kept reading. I wish I could tell you everything myself. Maybe that would have been easier. But some stories are too heavy to give to a child. Evan stopped. A child. 8 years old. He remembered the café now. Not clearly. But enough. His grandmother sitting at table 7. His hot chocolate. Rain sliding down the windows. And Lily. He remembered Lily's voice. He remembered the way she had crouched beside him so they were eye to eye. He remembered her asking, Do you like drawing roads? And his answer, Only if I know where they go. Evan closed his eyes. The memory was so vivid that for a second he could smell the chocolate again. He opened them. Nora was still watching. Did you know she wrote this? Yes. When? Years ago. Why didn't you give it to me? I couldn't. Why? Nora looked down. Because Lily didn't want you to have it until you were old enough to understand. Evan's voice became sharper. Understand what? Nora didn't answer. He returned to the letter. You were 8 when we met. You were angry with your parents. You thought your family was breaking apart, and you decided that if you could draw a better house, maybe everyone would stay inside it. Evan's eyes burned. He remembered. He had drawn a house. A ridiculous little house with a chimney and 4 windows. His grandmother had asked him who lived there. He'd said, "Everybody." He continued, "Your grandmother brought you to the cafe because she didn't know how to make you feel safe. She thought I might help. I didn't know how either. But you talked to me." Evan looked at Nora. "Why?" She shook her head. "Keep reading." He did. "You asked me if people could leave even when they loved each other." Evan stopped. His chest tightened. He remembered asking that question. He had forgotten who he'd asked. Now he knew. "I told you yes." "You didn't like that answer." A tiny smile appeared on Evan's face. That sounded like him. "So you asked me if people could stay even when they didn't love each other anymore." "I told you yes." "You liked that answer even less." Evan laughed quietly. The sound disappeared almost immediately. Then he read the next paragraph. "You asked me what happens when someone leaves. I told you that sometimes they come back. You asked me when. I said, when they are ready." Evan lowered the letter. He looked at Nora. "That's where Claire got it." Nora nodded. "Claire remembers everything." "Then why didn't she tell me?" "Because Lily asked her not to." Evan looked back at the letter. "You were very upset that day. So I gave you the blue pencil. I told you to draw somewhere safe." His fingers tightened around the paper. That memory was real, not imagined. Lily had given him the pencil. He remembered her hand around his. "You asked me where safe was. I said, anywhere you can be yourself." Evan stared at the words. He had spent most of his adult life doing the opposite. Becoming whatever the job needed. Whatever the relationship needed. Whatever the city expected. He suddenly understood why the sentence hurt. He continued, "Then you drew Nora." Evan stopped. He looked at her. Nora's face was completely still. "You were there." She nodded. "You drew me before you knew me." "Why?" "I don't know." Evan returned to the letter. "You said she looked lonely." His eyes moved toward Nora. She looked away. "You said you wanted to find her when you were older." Evan's heart beat harder. "I laughed because I thought you were talking about a character. I didn't understand what you were seeing. Your grandmother did." Evan stopped. His grandmother. Again. Always his grandmother. He kept reading. "That evening, your parents decided to separate." Evan's breath caught. He remembered his father's suitcase. His mother's crying. His grandmother driving him home. The house becoming quiet. His father leaving. And then, nothing. The rest of the night had disappeared from his memory. The letter explained why. "You blamed yourself." Evan closed his eyes. His jaw tightened. He hadn't known. For decades, he'd remembered the divorce as something that simply happened. Adults fighting. Adults making adult decisions. But somewhere inside his 8-year-old mind, he believed his drawings could have prevented it. "You told your grandmother that you had drawn a house where everyone stayed. You asked her why it hadn't worked." Evan's eyes filled. He looked away. Nora remained silent. "Your grandmother wanted to tell you that none of it was your fault. But you wouldn't listen. So she made a promise." Evan read slowly. "She promised that one day, when you were old enough, you would draw a home you actually wanted." He looked up. The drawing in the hallway flashed through his mind. The older version of himself. The house. The woman. Nora. He whispered, "That's what this is." Nora didn't answer. Evan looked at the next line. "I asked your grandmother to let you forget the cafe. Not because I wanted to disappear from your life. Because I wanted you to grow without waiting for me." His eyebrows pulled together. What did that mean? He read on. "There are people who become attached to the idea of a future before they have lived enough of the present. I didn't want you to spend your life searching for a woman you met when you were 8. Evan looked at Nora. Something changed in her expression. Pain. Maybe guilt. Maybe both. "You deserved to become yourself first. If we were ever supposed to meet again, we would. If not, I wanted you to have a full life anyway. Evan's eyes blurred. He wiped them. Then he reached the final paragraph. But there is one thing I never told you. He stopped. The old man leaned closer. Nora whispered, "Keep going." Evan read. Your drawing wasn't predicting the future. He frowned. It was remembering it. Evan stared. The café seemed to tilt. He read the sentence again. Then again. What does that mean? Nora looked at the old man. Neither answered. Evan's voice rose. What does that mean? The old man finally spoke. Your grandmother believed you weren't drawing what would happen. Then what was I drawing? Something that had already happened. Evan stared at him. That makes no sense. No. The old man looked toward the hallway. But your grandmother said that was the point. Evan stood. Where's Claire? The old man pointed. At the end of the café. Claire was standing behind the counter. Evan hadn't seen her arrive. She looked exactly as she had the first time. Dark hair. Green cardigan. Ceramic mug. Calm eyes. Evan walked toward her. You knew. Claire nodded. You knew all of it. Yes. You let me believe I was predicting things. No. You said the café showed people what they needed to remember. Yes. And I was remembering. Yes. Evan pointed toward the letter. Then why don't I remember meeting Nora? Claire looked at Nora. Because that's the part you haven't reached yet. Evan stopped. What? Claire's eyes softened. Evan, you didn't meet Nora for the first time in 1998. The room became completely still. Evan slowly turned toward Nora. She was crying now. Not dramatically. Just quietly. A tear moved down her cheek. Evan stared at her. Then when? Nora looked at him. And finally said, tomorrow. Evan didn't understand. What? Tomorrow. Claire walked toward them. The café doesn't only remember the past. She looked at the letter. Sometimes it remembers what you forgot to live. Evan's mouth went dry. Nora stood. Lily knew you would come back. Why? Because she had already met you. When? Nora took a breath. 28 years from now. Evan stared. The old brass clock began ticking louder. Tick, tick, tick. Claire looked at the clock. Then she said, Evan, you have until midnight. Until midnight for what? Claire looked toward the hallway. To find the door you didn't open the first time. A soft click came from somewhere behind them. Evan turned. At the end of the hallway, a door had appeared. He had never seen it before. It was painted blue, and beneath the handle was a small handwritten sign. For Evan. He looked at Nora. She wiped her eyes. Are you coming? Evan stared at the door. Then at the letter. Then at the blue pencil. He thought about his grandmother. About Lily. About all the years he'd spent moving forward without ever asking where he was going. Then he walked toward the blue door. And behind him, the café clock struck 7. Chapter 9. The Blue Door. Evan stood in front of the blue door. For some reason, he was more nervous than he'd been when he first walked into the café. Perhaps because this time he understood that whatever was behind it wasn't going to be another strange drawing. It was something personal. Something his grandmother had kept from him. Something Lily had known about. And something Nora had apparently been waiting for. Evan put his hand on the handle. Before I open this, he said, I need one answer. Claire stood several feet behind him. What? Is this going to hurt? Claire looked at Nora. Nora answered. Probably. Evan laughed softly. Great. But not in the way you mean. He looked at her. Nora gave him a small smile. You've spent a long time avoiding certain things, Evan. I've spent a long time working. Same thing sometimes. He couldn't argue with that. Evan turned the handle. The door opened. There was no dramatic light. No strange sound. Just a small room. It looked like an old office. A wooden desk. A reading chair. A lamp. A bookshelf. and on the desk sat a cardboard box. Evan walked inside. Nora followed. Claire stayed outside. Evan looked back. "You're not coming." Claire shook her head. "It's yours." He nodded. Then he approached the desk. The cardboard box had his name written across it. Evan. Underneath was another word. 1998. Evan opened it. Inside were drawings. Dozens of them. His drawings. A house. A road. A little boy. His grandmother. Lily. Nora. And one drawing he had never seen. It showed a café. But it wasn't the café as it looked now. It was the café as it had looked in 1998. Evan picked it up. On the back was his grandmother's handwriting. He drew this after Lily left. Evan looked at Nora. She left. Nora nodded. 3 days after you met her. Why? She was scared. Of me. No. Nora sat down. She was scared that you would grow up believing she had promised you something. Evan looked confused. What promise? That you would find her. He looked at the drawing. But she knew I'd forget. Yes. Then why did she keep everything? Nora looked at him. Because forgetting isn't the same as losing. Evan sat down. He studied the drawings. One showed his grandmother standing beside a road. Another showed Lily leaving in a car. Another showed Nora standing outside the cafe. Then he found something strange. A drawing of himself as an adult. Standing in front of the same blue door. Beside him was Nora. He turned it over. His grandmother had written, "He will think he is looking for Lily. He's really looking for himself." Evan closed his eyes. He finally understood. The cafe hadn't brought him back to find a lost romance. It had brought him back to find the part of himself he'd abandoned. The boy who drew because he wanted to understand people. The boy who believed a home was something you could create. The boy who hadn't yet learned to be afraid of wanting things. Evan looked at Nora. "Did you know?" She shook her head. "Not all of it." "Did Lily?" "Yes." "Did Grandma?" "Yes." He smiled sadly. "Everyone knew except me." Nora smiled. "That seems to be how families work." Evan laughed. For the first time that night, the heaviness in his chest began to loosen. Then he noticed one final envelope inside the box. It was smaller than Lily's letter. His grandmother's handwriting was on it. For Evan, when he finally stops looking backward. He opened it. There was only one page. "Evan, if you found this, then you've probably spent a great deal of time trying to understand why I kept the cafe from you. I'm sorry. But I don't regret protecting the little boy you were. You were too young to carry the weight of every story you could see. You thought being able to imagine something meant you were responsible for making it happen. It doesn't. You don't have to fix everyone. You don't have to save every relationship. And you don't have to spend your life trying to become the person other people imagine for you." Evan stopped reading. He wiped his eyes. Then continued. "If you remember nothing else, remember this. A home isn't the place where everyone stays. It's the place where you are allowed to be yourself. I hope you find one. Love, Grandma." Evan lowered the letter. Nora was crying. He looked at her. "You okay?" She laughed softly through her tears. "No. Me neither." They sat there for a while. No explanation. No mystery. Just two people in a small room, reading the words of someone who had been gone for years. Eventually Evan asked, "What happens now?" Nora looked toward the door. "Now? Yes. I suppose we leave. And the cafe? It'll disappear. Forever." Nora smiled. "Probably." Evan looked at the drawings. "That's a shame." "Why?" "Because I think I finally understand it." Nora stood. "What?" Evan looked at her. "The cafe doesn't remember every love story." Nora waited. "It remembers the moments when people decided whether to stay." Nora smiled. "Maybe." Evan stood. They walked toward the blue door. Before leaving, Evan looked back. The little room was already becoming darker. The drawings were fading. The edges of the desk were becoming indistinct. He reached for the door, then stopped. Nora. Yes. Did you ever become a writer? She smiled. Not exactly. What does that mean? I write sometimes. What? Letters. Evan smiled. To whom? People who need to hear something they already know. He laughed. That sounds suspiciously like a writer. Maybe. They stepped into the hallway. Claire was waiting. She looked at Evan. You found it. He nodded. What did you find? Evan looked at Nora. Then at the blue pencil. Enough. Claire smiled. That's usually the right amount. The cafe clock showed 11:42. Evan looked at it. How much time do we have? Claire's smile disappeared. Not much. Until midnight. She nodded. Evan looked around the cafe one last time. The photographs. The tables. The warm lights. The old pastry case. Table 7. He suddenly understood why people remembered this place. It wasn't because anything magical happened there. It was because people had once been honest there. They had said things they were afraid to say elsewhere. They had stayed when leaving would have been easier. They had left when staying would have destroyed them. They had fallen in love. They had fallen out of love. They had forgiven. They had waited. And sometimes they had simply sat quietly with a cup of coffee until they were brave enough to go home. Evan walked toward table 7. He placed the blue pencil on it. Then he took out his grandmother's letter. He folded it carefully. Nora stood beside him. You're leaving it? Evan nodded. Why? Because someone else might need it. Nora looked at him. You sure? Evan smiled. For the first time in a long time. The clock began ticking louder. 11:57. Claire appeared beside them. Time. Evan looked at Nora. Ready? She nodded. They walked toward the door. At 11:59, Evan turned around. The cafe was empty. No customers. No Claire. No old man. Just table 7. And the blue pencil. The clock clicked forward. 12 o'clock. The lights went out. Evan opened the front door. Cold night air touched his face. He stepped outside. Nora followed. The door closed behind them. When Evan turned around, there was no cafe. Only the old storefront. Brown paper. Dusty windows. A for-lease sign. Nora stood beside him. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Evan looked at the street. Then at Nora. Coffee. She smiled. There's a diner around the corner. Is it magical? No. Good. She laughed. And together, they walked down Willow Street. Final chapter. The cafe that remembered every love story. Years later, Evan would sometimes wonder whether the cafe had actually existed. There were no records of it. No business license. No photographs in the town archive. No newspaper articles. Nothing. The storefront eventually became a small cafe. A normal one. It served coffee, tea, blueberry muffins, cinnamon rolls, and surprisingly good grilled cheese sandwiches. Evan and Nora went there often. They always sat at table 7. The owner never asked why. Maybe he thought they liked the window. Maybe he noticed that Evan always looked toward the old clock on the wall. Maybe he simply understood that some people have their reasons. One rainy evening, many years after that strange summer, Evan and Nora sat together at table 7. They were older. Their hair had changed. Their faces had softened. Their lives had become fuller. There were photographs of their children on Evan's phone. There were grocery lists in Nora's bag. There were bills waiting at home. There was laundry that needed folding. There was nothing particularly cinematic about their evening. And that was precisely what Evan loved about it. Nora stirred her tea. You're staring. Evan smiled. I'm thinking. Dangerous. He laughed. Do you remember the cafe? Nora looked toward the window. Sometimes. Do you think it was real? She thought for a moment. Yes. Evan smiled. Why? Because I remember you. He looked at her. That doesn't prove anything. No. She reached across the table. Her fingers found his. But it doesn't have to. Outside, rain moved softly down the glass. Cars passed. People hurried beneath umbrellas. The world continued doing what it always did. Moving forward. Evan looked around the café. There were framed photographs on the walls now. Couples. Families. Friends. People laughing over coffee. People sitting alone. People meeting for the first time. People saying goodbye. He realized then that perhaps his grandmother had been right. Maybe every café remembers something. Not literally. Not with magic. But through the people who sit inside them. Every table holds pieces of someone's life. A first date. A difficult conversation. A marriage proposal. A breakup. A birthday. A goodbye. A quiet morning when someone finally decided to start over. The café didn't need to remember those stories. The people did. And sometimes, that's enough. Evan looked at Nora. I'm glad I came back. She smiled. Me too. He squeezed her hand. Even though you were incredibly mysterious. I was not. You absolutely were. I was protecting you. That's what mysterious people say. Nora laughed. Evan laughed too. And somewhere beneath the ordinary sounds of the café, he imagined he could hear an old brass clock ticking. Not counting down. Not warning him. Just keeping time. The way clocks are supposed to. He thought about Lily. About his grandmother. About the little boy he had once been. A boy who believed that if he could draw the right road, he would eventually find his way home. He finally understood what that boy had been trying to say. The road was never the important part. Neither was the destination. It was the courage to keep drawing. To keep choosing. To keep loving. To leave when leaving was necessary. To stay when staying was right. And, perhaps most importantly, to understand that home isn't always a building. Sometimes it's a person. Sometimes it's a memory. Sometimes it's a quiet table beside a rainy window. And sometimes, it's the life you finally allow yourself to live. Evan looked out at the rain. Nora leaned her head against his shoulder. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The evening settled gently around them. The lights above the tables glowed warm and soft. The coffee smelled rich and familiar. The rain kept falling. And for just a moment, Evan imagined a little boy somewhere, sitting at a table with a purple crayon, drawing a road into the distance. Perhaps the boy was drawing a house. Perhaps there was someone waiting on the porch. Perhaps he hadn't decided yet where the road would end. And maybe that was okay. Because life isn't a picture you have to finish before you begin. Sometimes you draw one line. Then another. And then another. You make mistakes. You erase them. You start again. You meet people along the way. Some stay. Some leave. Some return years later. And every once in a while, if you're lucky, you find someone who sits beside you while you draw. Someone who doesn't ask where the road is going. Someone who simply says, I'll come with you. Evan closed his eyes. Nora's hand remained in his. The rain whispered against the glass. And somewhere, perhaps only in memory, a little brass bell rang above an old café door. Ding. Then everything became quiet. And Evan finally understood the secret of the café that remembered every love story. It wasn't that the café remembered love. It was that love remembered people. It remembered the moments when they were brave. The moments when they were afraid. The moments when they stayed. The moments when they left. The moments when they found their way back. And sometimes, when the night was quiet enough, it remembered the most important story of all. The story of someone finally coming home to themselves. So if you're listening to this tonight, perhaps you don't need to solve everything before you fall asleep. You don't need to know where every road leads. You don't need to understand every goodbye. You don't need to know what tomorrow will bring. Maybe tomorrow is simply another blank page. Maybe you get to draw the next line when morning comes. For tonight, let the road wait. Let the questions wait. Let the unfinished things wait. Close your eyes. Listen to the rain. Imagine a warm little cafe somewhere in a quiet New England town. A soft light glowing through the window. A cup of something warm on the table. An old clock ticking gently in the background. And somewhere nearby, someone who cares about you. You don't have to find them tonight. You don't have to go anywhere. Just rest. Because some roads are long. Some stories take years. And some love stories are worth waiting for. Good night. And wherever your road takes you tomorrow, I hope it leads you somewhere safe.